Hello, welcome to today's webinar about how to make a good T-Splines model and hopefully win the 2011 design contest. I'm Matt Cederberg from T-Splines. I'm joined today by Kyle Houchins, who is an authorized T-Splines trainer, owner of the Outside Digital Art and Design, and also one of the judges both of last year's competition and this year's competition. This is a unique webinar for us. We've never done anything like this before, but we thought we'd just take a morning and take 20 to 30 minutes and review some of the submissions of last year's design contest and just kind of share with you what we thought were good features of those and how people use T-Splines well, and hope that that is a useful exercise for you as you enter this year's competition. So before we get started, we're just kind of curious over here about how everyone is coming along with their modeling, and we just wanted to launch a little poll. Have you started modeling your design for the modeling contest yet this year? So if you could just vote and let us know if you're procrastinating or if you're something that's on your plate right now. We'll just let a few more people vote to kind of see where everyone's at. And we'll go ahead and close this. So go ahead and share this now. So it looks like most of you are procrastinating. So if you haven't started yet, you're in good company. So maybe this is a timely webinar. But okay, so before I turn the time over to Kyle, just to review a couple things about the contest. It's from June 9th to August 9th, so we're coming up on about the halfway mark. And a big deadline coming up next Tuesday is if you're in the architectural category, you'll need to send us your model by Tuesday in order to be included to get the free prints during the contest, which will go to the top 10. So now, before I turn the time over to Kyle, I just want to briefly introduce the all of the judges this year. If you come to our T-Splines page and just go to 2011 judges, here's all the judges this year. We have been split up by category this year, so we have some in architecture. Let me just show my screen. So here's our judges this year. We have some in architecture, consumer products, jewelry, transit, and miscellaneous. So you can come here to read more about the judges and their background. But again, Kyle is just one of the judges this year, and he'll just take some time to show what he looks for in a good T-Splines model, and hope you can all ask a lot of questions during this. Again, we don't think this will take very much time, but hopefully it's a good experience. So with that, let's turn the time over to Kyle.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. As Matt said, this is a little bit of a different format for us, and basically what I wanted to do today was to talk a little bit about what we liked about some of the winners from last year. And I'll just go ahead and jump in on this. This was the spider backpack that was submitted, and the first thing that kind of struck me when I was reviewing these entries was, first of all, the kind of the artistic feel and the way this was laid out. I thought was really excellent. It showed all aspects of the product, and the kind of an added benefit of how actually it would work on a human form. And the kind of black and white presentation, I thought, was a little stark, but there was something about it that was just really kind of artistic and kind of very subtly elegant. I don't know. This one really struck me when I was going through. We had a ton of entries last year, and this was quite honestly the first one that really caught my eye and dragged me in. And as I was kind of browsing through the images to get started with the judging, this was the one that kind of dragged me in and was the first one I really opened and started digging through in depth. So I personally like this one. That I think the other judges reacted well to this one as well, and a really professional, really kind of artistic layout as far as the presentation. And I also really kind of enjoyed, from an aesthetic point of view, the wireframe layout, where you could kind of see where the T-spline surface was blending in with the functional, kind of elements of this thing. Let's look a little bit at the wireframe on this model and talk a little bit about what was done here. And basically, almost the entire model was done in T-Splines, which is nice because, I mean, we're a T-Splines company, so we like to see stuff that was done with our parts. Not an overreaching requirement. I mean, by all means, you can add other NURBS elements or sculpted elements or whatever you want to do, but there was a really strong use of T-splines all the way through the model, and the fact that almost every piece, including the legs and everything like that, the feet down here, were all T-splines parts. So I mean, that was really cool, from seeing as this is a T-splines contest. It was cool from that point of view to look and see how far this entry pushed the use of T-splines and the use of the technology to create stuff that, quite frankly, would be really difficult to create in NURBS. And let me throw a different shader on this, just so it's, I think that may be a little difficult to see here. Let me just shade this up in gray. So, all right. So, if you notice, virtually every aspect of this model, with the exception of these pieces, were T-splines parts, and created some geometry in here that quite frankly would be, insanity creating to try and make it NURBS. And that was really an important feature of this design, and the fact that it allowed the technology to push a form that, into areas that traditional computer modeling may have started to break down. And that's one of the things that we always kind of scratch our head with here, is trying to figure out ways that we can enable the design community with our tools to push past, shapes and forms and solutions to design problems that were technologically limited in the past. You may be able to envision some amazing thing in your mind, but the tools just aren't capable of doing it. And so when we see something like this, it's really gratifying from our point of view, in the fact that there was a design here that really, with the exception of maybe like a brush-based modeler or something like that, would have been difficult, if not, impossible to build with a traditional NURBS tool set. So this one for me was really successful. I really liked it, and I'm going to temper all my comments here with the disclaimer that these are my opinions. This is what I saw when I was looking through the contest, and certainly not the overreaching opinions of T-Spline Incorporated here. So if you don't like something I said, flame me, not Matt. The next piece that we saw here that I liked was this bracelet. Was very simple, but again, it was something that would be very difficult to model in NURBS. You've essentially got continuous branching Y branches that were curvature continuous, and again, even though that this is a fairly simple form, it was a fairly elegant solution, and something that would have been extremely difficult to build in NURBS. Certainly it could be done, but not at this level of quality and not at this level of continuity. So this one really struck me, and let's take a look at the wireframe on that one real quick. Again, you'll notice really beautiful topology here. This is really even a really nice use of the tool and a really fairly elegant model from a wireframe or from a layout point of view. And again, a very simple form, but something that I felt was a really good example of T-Splines being used for what T-Splines does best. I constantly hammer on when I do webinars about making sure that you're using T-Splines for what T-Splines does best, and I'm sure anybody who's seen more than one of my webinars has heard me say, you know, use hammers to drive nails and screwdrivers to drive screws, and not the other way around. If you try to pound a screw in, you can do it, but it's not going to work very well. And in this particular piece here, there was a couple of different tools used, and T-Splines was used for what T-Splines does really well, which is the leaf work and the ring shank and stuff like that. And then I believe there was some imported geometry as far as the gems and things like that. And the combination of elements here was, I thought, really well done and really intelligent as far as, you know, using hammers for nails and screws and screwdrivers for screws to create something that would have been better than if he had just built this thing in NURBS. And if we look at the wire file here, this was laid out really intelligently, where T-Splines was used to create pieces that would have been really time-consuming or difficult to make, and then he relied on, you know, some traditional NURBS modeling for other stuff that you know would have been, quite honestly, would have been kind of silly to make in T-Splines. You know, it'd be silly to make these gems in T-Splines, whereas all the other surfaces and things like that were in here, you know, they made a lot of sense as far as the way the T-Splines tools were used to create this particular piece. One thing that I noticed about this that I thought was interesting, and this is actually something that I do in my own practice, the way this model was made is, actually no, I take that back. It looks like you did trim all this out. Wow. All right. Well, what I was going to say is, in this particular case, you know, a lot of times if you're doing a piece like this that's going to stereolithography or going to an Eden printer or something like that, you don't necessarily always have to trim these elements out, because if you're building them as individual T-Splines pieces, you can actually leave them as closed, watertight geometry and just overlap them, so that when they go through a stereolithography machine, the part will actually just get made, assuming that this is all one piece. So you can save a little bit of time, and some of the purists out there may be throwing their hands in the air and calling me a heretic here, but in reality, this piece here could have been left untrimmed, and it would have still built just fine. Now, if you needed to build a fillet or something like that in between here, that's a different story. But when you're building elements like this, you know, you don't necessarily always have to Boolean them or trim them together. You can just leave them overlapping, and they'll go to a rapid prototyping machine just fine. The other cool thing about doing something like that is it makes editing the ring at a later date much simpler, because you can go in and grab these elements and rearrange them and stuff like that, as opposed to having to untrim it and all that kind of stuff. So, but this model, again, I thought was a really good example of showing what T-Splines does best, and using that, you'll notice a really kind of a nice, elegant transition down in here, and the leaves and the bezel and all that kind of stuff was done really well. And then the gems are hard, you know, imported NURB surfaces. So don't limit yourself to T-Spline stuff completely if your design calls for something else, but we do like to see lots of T-Splines in these. The next one was an architectural piece, and this a 10-page document on this entry, which was really interesting because there was a lot of theory involved in the thinking behind this model. But this was a situation where trying to create this model in NURBS would have made anyone insane. And in T-Splines, it was merely a situation where you can just start pulling this thing around to get forms that would have been prohibitively difficult to try and express in NURBS. And this is another thing that I say really often is one of the things that I really enjoy about T-Splines, working in T-Splines, is the fact that you can actually design in 3D because the tool is fast enough and flexible enough to allow you to actually have a vision in your head and sit down and start working without necessarily having to have everything planned out. And it allows you to actually explore stuff along the way and find solutions to design situations that you wouldn't necessarily have even seen if you had sat down and drawn this out as a sketch and then tried to build your sketch. In this case, you can be in a 3D environment and say, well, what if there was a walkway over here? Well, I'm just going to run some surfaces out here and try it. And if it doesn't work, I'll just grab them and delete them and then move them around and push and pull until I start getting forms that start working together. And the thing that just struck me about this model in general was that it would have been insane to try and build this in NURBS and to try and lay this out and describe it in a control drawing or in an elevation. It just would have made you insane. So I felt from an architectural point of view this was a really kind of exciting achievement, and I'd love to see buildings like this dotting the landscape here. So. This one was another one that I liked, and the renderings are a little dark. If you're going to do an automotive style entry, turn the lights up just a little bit for us so we can see these. There's some really interesting forms and some nice highlights happening here, but I had to actually get into the wireframe and shade this thing and rotate it myself in order to be able to fairly judge it. Beautiful renderings, but again, they were just a little bit dark. So when you're doing your renderings, if you can try and light them like they would be in a studio shot, something that if you think about like your typical catalog shot or something like that, where everything is described very well, that's the kind of stuff we like to see. Watch out for little floating models here. That's kind of something that was a little bit of a ding, but I did like the forms on this thing. And if we open it up and take a look at it, you'll notice that some really nice use of T-splines in here, and some really nice kind of form exploration. Again, stuff that you could model in NURBS, but it would be kind of prohibitively difficult in order to try and get some of these transitions to happen, and maybe a situation where some solutions were found that weren't necessarily originally planned on, and yet T-Splines allowed you to kind of explore some of these shapes and to come up with solutions that weren't necessarily originally apparent. If you guys have any questions along the way, by all means, please feel free to throw them out there, and Juan and Matt and we'll take a look at those and certainly answer any questions. If they have any questions for me, feel free to hit me with them, and I'll be more than happy to talk about kind of my thought process here. This was another one I really liked. I liked it from a design point of view right off the bat. It was kind of a quirky, fun design, and the Diablo chair, it's got a little bit of like the devil chair, and you're sitting in front of your desk and you're sitting in an office instead of being outside doing what you kind of do. And there was a lot of things that appealed to me from kind of a quirky design point of view on this thing. And I thought that the execution was really well done. The renderings were gorgeous. A couple of really neat kind of explorations of the shapes and stuff that he was looking at. The presentation I thought was really well done. And again, you know, all that aside, despite the fact that I love the concept, I love the presentation, and I love the design, technically it was really well done. And if you look at the back on this, again, a really good use of the tool. You wouldn't necessarily want to use T-Splines to build a mechanical pneumatic raising and lowering device, but on the other hand, you know, trying to build this back in nerves and have it all flow and be smooth like he's got it shown here would be really quite difficult. So let's poke through the wireframe on this one and take a look at what's in here.
Kyle, while you're pulling it up, we just got a question coming in. What is the criteria for judging TS Elements models, given that a lot of the modeling could be done in something like Modo? Maybe I can take a stab at that, and then if you don't mind. One thing that we're thrilled about this year is that you can use TS Elements for SolidWorks in your modeling. So whether you're starting with T-Splines for Rhino or starting with Modo, SolidWorks is just a very powerful software that you can use to add features to the model. So if you are bringing your model in from T-Splines or Modo, then we'll look at just the edge flow to make sure it's a clean model. A lot of what makes a clean T-Splines model is often what makes a clean sub-D model. T-Splines has a few enhancements that you can't do in sub-Ds, like adding local detail, but in general just having nice edge loop flow and a clean model is what we'll look for. Do you have anything else to add there, Kyle?
Well, I guess from my point of view, I think that one of the most interesting and powerful kind of underlying unspoken capabilities that T-Splines has is the fact that it so effectively bridges different aspects of digital modeling. And you know, we could be snotty and pretentious and say if it wasn't built in T-Splines, then we don't want to see it. But I don't think that's fair, because I think one of the things that T-Splines does really, really well that a lot of people have discovered on their own, but a lot of people really haven't, is the fact that you can essentially build something in Modo and end up with it in SolidWorks using T-Splines. And that just previously was not possible. And so I guess one of the things that I'm certainly open to is for, you know, with the immense amount of talent of the people who are out here who are using our tools, the thing that always really gets me excited is when I see somebody, you know, figure out a different way to pound the nail in. You know, use the side of the hammer to pound the nail in. use the back of the hammer to pound the nail in if it works better. The thing that I'm really interested in seeing or learning about or talking about is what are the kind of the unusual ways of using T-Splines that allow you to do things that you weren't previously capable of doing. Because I mean, let's be honest, the entire reason for having any type of digital tool whatsoever is to make it easier for you to do your job better, faster, and cheaper. So if you come up with a super slick workflow, as long as T-Splines is in there somewhere, you know, don't just send us a Modo model because that's not quite fair. It's not a Modo contest. But if you used Modo and T-Splines and SolidWorks and something else, you know, that's great. Show us how those dots get connected and think about logically where T-Splines fit in and how T-Splines enabled that design to do something that you weren't previously capable of doing. And that, I think, is a completely valid, completely legitimate, and quite honestly a fairly exciting development as far as how these type of things have been judged. But I will warn you, we can pick a moto model out from a mile away, so if you just send us a moto model, we're going to see it because moto models have some telltale characteristics that make them pretty easy to pick out. But by all means, use Moto, use T-Splines, use SolidWorks, use whatever you want, but just remember that this is a T-Splines contest, and we'd like to see how T-Splines enabled you to do something that you weren't able to do without T-Splines.
Yeah,
so,
but to clarify, Kyle, if it's a Moto model inside SolidWorks, that's perfectly valid. So
absolutely. Like I said, that would be a situation where you can't throw a Moto model straight into SolidWorks without using T-Splines. So, that's to me a completely legitimate use of the tool, and I think is something that actually is kind of cool. So, looking at this model again, it's been converted to NURBS at this point, so there's a lot of iso curve density, but the layout and the flow on the way that this model went together, I think was really a great example of stuff that would have been really difficult to do any other way. So let's jump through a few more of these, and then this one to me was, this was my pick for the overall win. I thought this model was something that without T-Splines you would have had to do it in ZBrush or Freeform or some sort of brush-based modeler, which would have previously locked you out of getting it into SolidWorks or getting it into Pro E or something like that. And certainly it could have been rapid prototype and stuff like that, but I thought this model with this level of detail and something that looked like it was done in ZBrush, in the fact that it was in fact a T-Splines model that could successfully be transferred into SolidWorks and be engineered with a traditional pipeline. I thought this was just absolutely stunning. An amazing use of the tool, very intelligent use of other tools. He did do T-Splines parts in here, but then Booleaned the holes out. He did place some arrayed objects in here that were poly surfaces, did some trim surfaces up here. But the leaf work and stuff in here, this was all T-Splines, and I love the layout. I love the rendering. Looks like you could just stick your finger through it and walk away with it. And this for me was my pick for the overall win. I thought it was brilliantly done. A nice little butt kissy logo thrown in there. We appreciated that. So made a great promo piece. We've used it a lot, and have gotten a really stellar reaction to everybody that we've shown this to. Let's see. Throw this one up. Take a look at it real quick. And shade this real quick. And you'll notice that at this point, almost the entire model is T-Splines. Let me throw a different shader on here real quick. And looks like some of the things are in box mode, but you'll notice that a really nice simple layout, really nice topology, a really nice use of everything in here. And what this entry struck me as was everything that was done in here was done really intelligently and really well thought out. And he didn't go through here and try and model every little nook and cranny, because although you can do that in T-Splines, it's not necessarily the best tool for doing that kind of stuff. And then he took this into ZBrush and he did some more detailing on it, and I think there actually was a second model in here. Yeah, this is the final. And shade this. And you'll notice that what started off as T-Splines parts, he then went and worked on in ZBrush and added some veining and some other detailing and some stuff like that that ended up really enhancing the model. And so what he ended up doing was building his original base surfaces in T-Splines, because quite honestly, this is even, I mean, I use ZBrush as well, but this is even, it's easier to lay this kind of stuff out and play with it and mush it around here than it would be even to try and, you know, lay this stuff out in Z-spheres and all that kind of stuff, just because it's such an easily accessible tool. And then he went into ZBrush and threw the veining and stuff on here that really just kind of pushed this one up over the top. And so for me, I like this one for a number of reasons. One, I thought it was a great design. Two, the renderings I thought were gorgeous. And three, he used T-Splines for what T-Splines does really, really well, and then went and used ZBrush for what ZBrush does really, really well, and ended up with a piece in the final that was better because of T-Splines, better because of ZBrush, better because of all the stuff that was combined and used together. And to me, I thought this was my pick for the overall win. I really like this. I thought this was a really great job. And then there were a couple other in here, and then I think this bus terminal I thought was really cool. This again, a really elaborate architectural layout, and again, this is a situation where in T-Splines, building a model like this is so accessible and so, I don't want to say easy because there was obviously a lot of work put into this, but it's so much easier than if you were trying to go in here and worry about whether or not this Y branch was going to have a big nasty highlight jank in it here. Instead, he could just pull the shape out, know it was going to be smooth, and then, you know, use these struts and adjust them individually. And there was a lot of things about this that T-Splines really enhanced the workflow and really enhanced the ability to be able to create a model like this, as opposed to, you know, if you were working off the elevations and trying to build this in AutoCAD or something like that, you know, would make you insane. So this I thought was really cool. I kind of like the rain rendering. I thought it was kind of cool. And the model on this was really pretty cool too. I'm gonna just look at the one part because the full model is like 200 megs. But you'll see, you know, a really kind of a cool shape and a really nice use of kind of T-Splines parts built in here. And then when combined into the final scene, you know, it made for a really effective final presentation. So so those are kind of my thoughts. That's kind of my thought process. I'm always looking for, I'm a render snob, I'll tell you that right off the bat. I really like really slick, really nice renderings. So, you know, definitely put the time into that. From a technical point of view, kind of my criteria that I look for is how did T-Splines make the model better than it would have without T-Splines. And, you know, stuff that can just be built easily in NURBS doesn't get me nearly as excited as something like, you know, that Signet ring. Then I just look at that and just be like, oh my God, if I had to model that in NURBS, that would make me insane. And you know, the overall professionalism of the piece and stuff like that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if there's anything anybody wants to talk about. We've got a little bit of time that we can still use here, and any other thoughts, go ahead and hit me with them.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. Just as we're waiting for any other questions that might come in, one reminder, I guess. Today's the last day of promotional T-Splines pricing for version 3. So if you haven't gotten your upgrade yet or haven't gotten T-Splines version 3 yet, if you get it by the end of today, you can save yourself a little bit of money. But beyond that, yeah, if any questions, go ahead and type them on in, and we can address those. Here's just a question: is the student pricing going up as well? No, we've decided to keep the student pricing where it's at. That's it's $199. Academic lab packs are $1,000, and that will get it basically in your whole lab up to 30 computers. So yeah, keeping the student price the same is important to us. So that will stay at $199.
Any other questions from anybody?
Z-Corp. Now, what scale will the Z-Corp models be? Last year when they did this, they were, oh gosh, you see those, Cal? I mean, most of them could probably fit in about a shoebox. So what is that? I mean, no more than probably 12 by 12 inches, and maybe, I don't know how high it could be. Probably 12 inches high.
A typical Z-Core cube is like 11 by 17 by 9. But the Z-Core guys, I'm sure, you know, they will scale it to fit. So it's, if you send us a full-size bus station, you're not going to get a full-size bus station. It's going to be teeny tiny. But they will print it, and they'll print it, you know, something that's appropriate so they can get it into one vat. What they're not going to do is, you know, is split it up and assemble it and all that kind of stuff. That's one nice thing about Z-Core is it is an additive process, so it you know, undercuts and stuff like that will build just fine. Don't bother putting wall thickness on something because it'll just build solid, and you know, without a way to get the powder out of the inside of it, it doesn't make sense to do stuff wall thickness anyway. So unless, you know, enclosed volume wall thickness. So just think of things as solid parts.
Here's another question: would a preliminary conceptual Yeah, if you have a preliminary conceptual model, would that be sufficient for Tuesday's deadline? That's a great question, and the answer may be yes. So basically, we will take the 10 models that look most promising, and those are the ones that will be printed. So, I mean, that may mean a very, very simple model that looks like it's going somewhere. That may mean a fleshed out model. Yeah, if all you have is a conceptual model, then great, and yeah, it just may win. The story that Z-Corp is trying to tell with this is just to be able to show how by printing out models when you get to different stages, it helps your design evolve. So if you can get it to a point where seeing a print would be helpful, then go ahead and throw that in.
Different category judges judge other categories submitted pieces. Yes, you have to deal with my giant ego and inflated sense of self-worth in every category. However, the architecture guys are going to have more pull on the architecture stuff than than we do. But the car stuff, I'm going to have more pull on the car stuff. The jewelry guys are going to have more pull on the jewelry stuff. So
yeah, actually,
it all ends up in the wash.
Yeah, I hate to break this to Kyle, but that's actually not how it's going to work.
I've been overruled.
It will just be yeah, your model will just be judged by that specific category. If there's a tiebreaker and they can't work it out, we'll go outside of that. But no, it will just be by that category judges.
Ignore everything I just said.
Yeah. Otherwise, with 12 judges, it would be, I would not want to mediate that. So.
You big chicken.
Any news on the automotive webinar that Kyla was working on?
Will, I'm other than to say that it's in progress, I have strong feelings about making sure that is not just a fluff piece, and I really want to try and get something that's going to be useful for car guys. I haven't gotten as far on it as I would like to, but it's definitely something that I'm working on. I actually was working with Juan a couple weeks ago about an issue that popped up with one of the models that I was working on, and quite honestly haven't gotten a chance to get back and try and work through that. So it is still in the works. I'm hoping that when it comes out, it's something that's useful and not just like, this is how you make a headlight. Thanks for coming by. I'd like to try and get through, ideally I'd like to try and get through and show how you would lay out, a basic car body. So trying to fit that in an hour is difficult, but I want to get it down to the point where the workflow is something that's useful for everybody instead of just me. Any other questions?
Okay, well, thanks for coming, everyone, and we'll see you the next webinar.
Thanks for coming, everybody.